and wherever you're watching from around the world. We're live from our studios here in Lagos, Nigeria. The debate many have been waiting for has come and gone, but it has left many questions than answers about the two men who are vying for the country's top job. President Joe Biden gave a stumbling performance in the 90 minutes televised showdown with his predecessor, Mr. Donald Trump. This is the first televised debate of the 2024 presidential election campaign. Mr. Trump attacked the incumbent repeatedly on the economy and his foreign policy record and a range of other issues, while Mr. Biden went for his rival's criminal conviction and alleged attempts to overturn the 2020 elections. Meanwhile, we understand that Democrats are said to be very concerned about the president's early incoherent answers that have set off panic in the party. However, we're also hearing that Vice President Kamala Harris has now defended President Biden, saying, quote, "It was a slow start, but there was a strong finish," end quote. All right, we have journalists and experts lined up on the program for you today to have an in-depth analysis as we get to unpack the takeaways of this particular big and presidential historic debate. We'll delve into some of the issues raised at the event hosted by local media, CNN, with anchors Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, who co-moderated the event that held in Atlanta, Georgia. But take a listen to both leaders spiral on issues of the economy in the U.S.
Say to voters who feel they are worse off under your presidency than they were under President Trump.
We got to take a look at what I was left when I became president and what Mr. Trump left me. We had an economy that was in free fall. The pandemic was so badly handled. Many people were dying. All he said was, "It's not that serious. Just inject a little bleach into your arm. You'll be all right." The economy collapsed. There were no jobs. Unemployment rate rose to 15%. It was terrible. And so what we had to do is try to put things back together again. And that's exactly what we began to do. We created 15,000 new jobs. We brought out the position where we have 800,000 new manufacturing jobs. But there's more to be done. There's more to be done. Working class people are still in trouble. I come from Scranton, Pennsylvania. I come of a household where the kitchen table, if the things weren't able to be met during the month, it was a problem. Price of eggs, the price of gas, the price of housing, the price of a whole range of things. That's why I'm working so hard to make sure I deal with those problems. And we're going to make sure that we reduce the price of housing. We're going to make sure we build 2 million new units. We're going to make sure we cap rents so corporate greed can't take over. The combination, what I was left with in corporate greed, is the reason why we're in this problem right now. In addition to that, we're in a situation where if you take a look at all that was done in his administration, he didn't do much at all. By the time he left, things were in chaos. Literally chaos. And so we put things back together. We created, I said, those jobs. We make sure we had a situation where we brought down the price of prescription drugs, which is a major issue for many people, to $15 for an insulin shot as opposed to $400. No senior has to pay more than $200 for any drug, all the drugs they can include beginning next year. And the situation is and we're going to make that available to everybody, to all Americans. So we're working to bring down the price around the kitchen table, and that's what we're going to get done.
Thank you. President Trump?
We have the greatest economy in the history of our country. We have never done so well. Everybody was amazed by it. Other countries were copying us. We got hit with COVID, and when we did, we spent the money necessary so we wouldn't end up in a Great Depression, the likes of which we had in 1929. By the time we finished, so we did a great job. We got a lot of credit for the economy, a lot of credit for the military, and no wars, and so many other things. Everything was rocking good. But the thing we never got the credit for, and we should have, is getting us out of that COVID mess. He created mandates that was a disaster for our country. But other than that, we had given them back a country where the stock market actually was higher than pre-COVID, and nobody thought that was even possible. The only jobs he created are for illegal immigrants and bounce-back jobs, a bounce-back from the COVID. He has not done a good job. He's done a poor job, and inflation's killing our country. It is absolutely killing us.
All right, so there you go. President Joe Biden and former U.S. President Donald Trump sparring out in that very historic presidential debate as to the race to the White House. We're live in Houston, Texas, and New York in just a moment, but let's get after it as we begin first in Washington, D.C., where VOA's correspondent Mike Hovey is standing by as we dissect and unpack all of this. Mike, it's great to see you. It's the day after the debate. What is the atmosphere like in D.C., where you are, as well as the country generally?
Thank you for having me. I mean, the atmosphere is normal as everyday business. People have returned back to their normal lives. However, of course, the talk of the town is what happened last night, the very first presidential debate of the 2024 campaign between one that is, might I add, a very historic debate, because this was the first time that you saw an incumbent president going up against a former president. So a lot of people had their eyes tuned in last night. Millions of Americans all paying attention to see who they're going to be voting for in November.
Mm. And of course, I mean, as you said, many people anticipated this particular debate. I'm just wondering as to perhaps the assessment of Americans about this debate. What are you hearing around you?
In talks, people that support different parties all have expressed their opinions on what happened last night. Of course, one of the discussions was around what the candidates all presented or what they had to offer. One thing that was applauded by a lot of analysts, if you watch across the newsrooms and of course across the news outlets, is how the debate itself was conducted. This year it was very orderly. A lot of things were in order. They had certain measures in place to ensure that, for example, political candidates don't get to talk over each other. The mic would be muted when each candidate is talking. So they put in so many measures that a lot of people applauded, because this year they got to hear a coherent debate and points that were presented by both presidential candidates.
And Mike, I understand you have to go now, but allow me squeeze in one final question, because one thing that stands out in that particular historic debate is the performance of President Joe Biden, which we understand has left Democrats concerned about his candidacy. What else are you hearing?
Well, I must, I guess, expound on that. Not all Democrats are concerned. Some Democrats have expressed concern, among them being Claire McCaskill. She's a former Democratic senator. Last night was on MSNBC, and she expressed her concern and echoed concerns of other Democrats. However, there are other Democrats who stood by the incumbent president, Joe Biden. Among them is Mr. John Fetterman. He is a Democratic senator. He himself had a bad debate this year, but nonetheless, no matter what, he actually went into his debate. He was struggling, he was stuttering because he was recovering from a stroke. But nonetheless, he still emerged victorious. So he's told his compatriots that, hey, you need to calm down and stand by the incumbent president.
Well, I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you who won this debate in your own opinion, but we must thank you most kindly for bringing us up to speed. Mike Hovey, VOA reporter live for us in Washington, D.C. Great to see you again, as always. And we are not done just yet with this historic presidential debate. There's so much to unpack as we consider the major talking points and perhaps the takeaways from the U.S. presidential debate. One of such was the Israel-Hamas war. President Joe Biden reiterated U.S. support for Israel's war on Gaza, in which we know that and can confirm that more than 37,000 Palestinians have been killed since October last year. Mr. Biden adds that his administration is continuing to send experts and intelligence to hinder Palestinian group Hamas in the war. But Mr. Trump snapped back, saying it is Israel that wants to continue with the war, calling Mr. Biden a Palestinian, but they don't like him because he is, quote, a very bad Palestinian. Joining us live on the program, we have analysts in the United States to break this down for us. Dr. Ohiro Oniesele is the founding director of social work program at the University of Delaware. He joins us live from New York. Also on the program is Somto Ike Ejiofor, political commentator who is live for us in Houston, Texas. And finally, Jonah LeBlanc, national security, law and foreign policy commentator, is live for us in Washington, D.C. Ladies and gentlemen, we must thank you indeed, and thank you most kindly for agreeing to speak with us here on Channels TV So much for us to dissect, but let's get things started in Washington, D.C., where LeBlanc is. We must begin the conversation with you, Joanna. Walk us through an overview of your impressions about this very historic 90 minutes presidential debate.
Sir, thank you so much for having me on. Like you said, last night's presidential debate was quite historic. And I think that the candidates stayed on message for the most part. As you know, the Republican Party, their biggest concern, their messaging has been around immigration, the border crisis in particular, the economy, as well as Biden's performance. Whereas with the Democratic Party, you saw more of a conversation that dealt with substantive issues, like how the economy was before President Biden took office, and what he has done to bring the economy back to life. But the reality is that I think the things that the American people really, really care about were not necessarily discussed in depth, which are the high cost of living, inflation, student debt crisis, and so on. And interestingly, what you also saw is that President Trump was a lot more calmer than people was expecting. They were expecting, I think the American public was expecting more of a theatrical, like we saw back in 2016, and even the most recent presidential debate in 2020. But we saw something quite different from him. He stayed on message, stayed on target, which was the border crisis, the economy, and the immigrants. The whole divide and conquer kind of a narrative. Immigrants coming into this country, taking jobs from African Americans and other groups. So that was the message that he stuck to, and I think he was able to deliver his message. However, on Biden's side, he did not perform as well as he should have. That is just the reality. And for us to say anything otherwise would be quite disingenuous. But it's not the end of the world. I think that he can always bounce back. There will be other opportunities in terms of policy positions that he will take that the American people may support. And he can actually bounce back from his performance. But there are a lot of concerns in Washington and around the U.S. About his performance, and because they were expecting a whole lot more from him. They were expecting him to energize the base, energize the Democratic Party. And unfortunately, Mr. Biden failed to do that. In fact, both of them failed to energize the American people, the American public. But nonetheless, the Republican nominee President Donald J. Trump did stay on message.
All right. Joanna, we have to thank you most kindly. Wonderful analysis there. I would like to bring in Dr. Hero here and, of course, Somto in just a moment. But let's take a listen to both leaders speak on the Israel-Hamas war before I get the assessments of my other two guests on the show as well. Take a listen to both men.
What additional leverage will you use to get Hamas and Israel to end the war? You have 2 minutes.
Number one, everyone from the United Nations Security Council straight through to the G7 to the Israelis and Netanyahu himself have endorsed the plan I put forward. Which has 3 stages to it. The first stage is trade the hostages for a ceasefire. Second phase is a ceasefire with additional conditions. The third phase is the end of the war. The only one who wants the war to continue is Hamas, number one. They're the only ones standing out. We're still pushing hard to get them to accept. In the meantime, what's happened? In Israel, we're finding that the only thing I've denied Israel was 2,000-pound bombs. They don't work very well in populated areas. They kill a lot of innocent people. We're providing Israel with all the weapons they need and when they need them. And by the way, I'm the guy that organized the world against Iran when they had a full-blown intercontinental ballistic missile attack on Israel. No one was hurt. No one Israeli was accidentally killed, and it just stopped. We saved Israel. We are the biggest producer of support for Israel of anyone in the world. And so there are 2 different things. Hamas cannot be allowed to be continued. We continue to send our experts and our intelligence people as to how they can get Hamas like we did bin Laden. You don't have to do it. And by the way, they've been greatly weakened Hamas, greatly weakened, and they should be. They should be eliminated. But you've got to be careful for using certain weapons among population centers.
Just going back to Ukraine for 1 second. We have an ocean separating us. The European nations together have spent 100 billion, or maybe more than that, less than us. Why doesn't he call them and say, you got to put up your money like I did with NATO? I got them to put up hundreds of billions of dollars. The Secretary General of NATO said Trump did the most incredible job I've ever seen. They wouldn't have any, they were going out of business. We were spending almost 100% of the money was paid by us. He didn't do that. He's getting all, you got to ask these people to put up the money. We're over $100 billion more spent, and it has a bigger impact on them because of location, because we have an ocean in between. You got to ask them. As far as Israel and Hamas, Israel's the one that wants to go. He said the only one who wants to keep going is Hamas. Actually, Israel is the one, and you should let him go and let him finish the job. He doesn't want to do it. He's become like a Palestinian, but they don't like him because he's a very bad Palestinian. He's a weak one.
All right, so there you go. Both men speaking about the war in Gaza. Dr. Hero, I wonder what you make of both men on the war in Gaza.
Well, I am very happy that you played that clip for many reasons. Number one, it's a reminder that Mr. Biden's problems extend beyond this debate. The problems actually began before this debate. The youths in America voted overwhelmingly for him, when he was running for office the first time. And this time, he was not going to get the youth vote. And last night, he had a very good chance to bring them back. He didn't do it. And the reason they didn't want to vote for him, and I'm sure that you saw all of the protests in on U.S. campuses over the last few months, and they didn't want to vote for him because our youth very often believe that there needs to be equity in all that we do, and they did not see that in the way that we have handled the Israel war in Gaza. And so last night was a great opportunity to do something, but apparently he didn't do it. But what you also heard, and the other reason why that clip is very important, is because it also shows you what happened all through the night. Trump making up stories, and everything you heard him say there was a lie. Everything he said was a lie.
Doctor,
go ahead.
All right, so I mean, we'll come to that in terms of the facts check as to, in terms of the fact checks from both men. But I'd like to bring in Somto, who is in Houston, Texas. Somto, I wonder if you perhaps agree with Dr. Hero, who is live for us in New York, because according to flash polls, Trump outperformed Mr. Biden. What do you say, Somto?
Kelly, you and I were texting last night as the debate was going on. I don't know if you remember that. Yes, the debate, President Biden did not perform as we would all have loved him to. Like the professor was saying, professor has a more in-depth look and analysis into what the youths are thinking, because he's literally a professor in the university. I am not a professor, not right now. But yes, I did have a lot of undergraduates, people who I mentor, reach out to me during the protest. And I am of the opinion that let the children protest. Remember, during our parents' time, during the time of Babangida and during the time of the military regime, our parents protested too in the universities. I remember that because my dad would talk about it all the time, about how they in Nsukka would protest and how they would make sure that their voices were heard. The same thing goes. It's always been the universities protesting. So the professor is right. And no, Mr. Biden did not perform up to par. And let us also know that many presidents over the last 30 years, the last 9 presidents have not performed the last 9 incumbent presidents have not performed their best in their first incumbent debate. So this is a historical fallacy. This is not something that's new. But again, he did not perform to the best of his ability. But then again, people forget him. Mr. Biden is not someone who goes and just yells and goes and, postulates around. He's someone that's very quiet, and he also has a stammering effect. People forget that too, right? So that also came into play yesterday. But
I know
all
that.
in all,
Yes, I also understand the Democrats have. Yes, the Democrats have also put out a statement there saying that he has a cold as well, and I'm battling with a cold, and that perhaps could have also influence his performance. Ladies and gentlemen, on the war in Ukraine, former President Trump says if he was president, Russia's invasion of Ukraine would not have happened. Trump offered to, quote, settle the war started by Mr. Vladimir Putin, as he suggested Russia would have never attacked its smaller neighbor if the U.S. had, quote, a real president in the office. He then pledged that if he wins the elections before taking office on January 20, he will have settled the war. Let's take a listen to both men as regards to the war.
As far as Russia and Ukraine, if we had a real president, the president that was respected by Putin, he would have never invaded Ukraine. A lot of people are dead right now, much more than people know. You know, they talk about numbers. You can double those numbers, maybe triple those numbers. He did nothing to stop it. In fact, I think he encouraged Russia from going in. I'll tell you what happened. He was so bad with Afghanistan. It was such a horrible embarrassment, most embarrassing moment in the history of our country, that when Putin watched that and he saw the incompetence, that he should have fired those generals, like I fired the one that you mentioned, and so he's got no love lost, but he should have fired those generals. No general got fired for the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country, Afghanistan, where we left billions of dollars of equipment behind. We lost 13 beautiful soldiers, and 38 soldiers were obliterated. And by the way, we left people behind, too. We left American citizens behind. When Putin saw that, he said, you know what? I think we're going to go in and maybe take this was his dream. I talked to him about it, his dream. The difference is he never would have invaded Ukraine, never. Just like Israel would have never been invaded in a million years by Hamas. You know why? Because Iran was broke with me. I wouldn't let anybody do business with them. They ran out of money. They were broke. They had no money for Hamas. They had no money for anything. No money for terror. That's why you had no terror at all during my administration. This place, the whole world is blowing up under him.
President Biden?
I've never heard so much malarkey in my whole life. Look, the fact of the matter is that we're in a situation where, let's take the last point first. Iran attacked American troops, caused brain damage for a number of these troops, and he did nothing about it. Recently, not when he was president. They attacked. He said they're just having headaches. That's all it is. He didn't do a thing when the attack took place, number one. Number two, we got over 100,000 Americans and others out of Afghanistan during that airlift. Number three, we found ourselves in a situation where, if you take a look at what Trump did in Ukraine, this guy told Trump, do whatever you want, and do whatever you want. And that's exactly what Trump did to Putin, encourage him, do whatever you want. And he went in. And listen to what he said when he went in. He was going to take Kyiv in 5 days, remember? Because it's part of the old Soviet Union. That's what he wanted to reestablish, Kyiv. And he, in fact, didn't do it at all. He wasn't able to get it done. And they've lost thousands and thousands of troops, 500,000 troops.
President Trump,
I never said that.
For 1 minute, I just want to go back to my original question, which is, are Putin's terms acceptable to you? Keeping the territory in Ukraine?
Acceptable. No, they're not acceptable.
All right, so there you go, both men speaking about issues around Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But just before I move to my next question, as I engage our guests who are in Houston, Texas, Washington, D.C., and of course in New York, let's also take a listen to both men discuss funding for Ukraine.
He's given $200 billion now or more to Ukraine. He's given $200 billion. That's a lot of money. I don't think there's ever been anything like it. Every time that Zelensky comes to this country, he walks away with $60 billion. He's the greatest salesman ever. And I'm not knocking him. I'm not knocking anything. I'm only saying the money that we're spending on this war, and we shouldn't be spending, it should have never happened. I will have that war settled between Putin and Zelensky as president-elect before I take office on January 20th. I'll have that war settled. People being killed so needlessly, so stupidly, and I will get it settled, and I'll get it settled fast before I take office.
President Biden, you have a minute.
The fact is that Putin is a war criminal. He's killed thousands and thousands of people. And he has made one thing clear. He wants to reestablish what was part of the Soviet Empire, not just a piece. He wants all of Ukraine. That's what he wants. And then you think he'll stop there? Do you think he'll stop when if he takes Ukraine? What do you think happens to Poland? What do you think of Belarus? What do you think happens to those NATO countries? And so if you want a war, you ought to find out what he's going to do, because if in fact he does what he says and walks away, by the way, all that money we give Ukraine are from weapons we make here in the United States. We give them the weapons, not the money at this point. And our NATO allies have produced as much funding for Ukraine as we have. That's why we're strong. I never heard so much foolishness. This is a guy who wants to get out of NATO. Are you going to stay in NATO? He's going to pull out of NATO. The idea that we have, our strength lies in our alliances as well. It may be a big ocean, but we're ever able to avoid a war in Europe, a major war in Europe? What happens if, in fact, you have Putin continue to go into NATO? We have an Article 5 agreement. Attack on one is attack on all. You want to start the nuclear war he keeps talking about, go ahead. Let Putin go in and control Ukraine and then move on to Poland and other places. You see what happens then. He has no idea what the hell he's talking about. And by the way, I got 50 other nations around the world to support Ukraine, including Japan and South Korea, because they understand that this kind of dislocation has a serious threat to the whole world peace. No major war in Europe has ever been able to be contained just to Europe.
So, I mean, Joanna, I have to bring you here because you're a national security law and foreign policy commentator. I wonder what you make of the submissions of both men in terms of Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Well, look, the reality is that the United States Congress has spent more than $175 billion in supporting Ukraine against Russia. We know Mr. Trump, he believes in an America First policy. And regardless of your position, whether or not the conflict is justified or not, let's talk about the American people. Mr. Trump's greatest supporter in Congress, well, one of his greatest supporters in Congress is Marjorie Greene Taylor. And she has made it very clear that the American Congress must stop supporting Ukraine because people in America need those funds for other reasons, such as, again, the student debt crisis, the housing crisis in this country. And if President Trump were in office, would we be where we are in terms of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine? Perhaps not. We know that Mr. Trump has a great relationship with Putin. We know that Mr. Trump prides himself in being a negotiator. And again, regardless of your position about Mr. Trump's presidency, we can all agree that under Mr. Trump, there weren't as many conflicts under his presidency. Maybe it's just a luck, or maybe it was because of his America First policy. But the American people, you have young people who are suffering in terms of high cost of living. How do you explain to those folks that we have to support Ukraine and we have to spend more than $75 million in a war when the cost of living is through the roof? These are the challenges that the Democratic Party has to be able to navigate in order to win their support in the next election in November. And then you have the Gaza and Israel conflict, where you see a great deal of financial support for the conflict, right? So people are asking themselves, where are the priorities of the American? But even if when it comes to the Gaza and the Israel conflict, even if you had a Mr. Trump in office, I think this conflict America would have addressed it just the way you see it. Because the reality is that when it comes to Israel policy, that is one area that both Republicans and Democrats actually agree on. But at the end of the day, the American taxpayers are seeing a great deal of resources being provided to other countries while they can't even afford the cost of living here in this country. And these are the major concerns. And it's interesting because for the very first time in American history, since the Vietnam War, we're going to see that U.S. foreign policy is going to play a role in the outcome of the presidential election.
All right, I'd like to bring in...
I vehemently disagree. I disagree with almost everything Joanna said.
Maybe you can do that. You can do that in 20 seconds, please. So we get to talk about other issues as well.
I vehemently disagree. She talked about using the monies for student loan debt relief. Donald Trump hasn't said anything about student loan debt relief. Donald Trump hasn't talked about affordable housing. He did a time. Ukraine. So we've always been on the side of peace. I'm not saying that we shouldn't. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let me clarify for a second. I did not say that.
Please do. Absolutely, please do.
Student debt crisis. In fact, it's the complete opposite. The Republican Party does not want that. What I said was the American people's sentiment towards the United States providing financial support to other nations.
Thank you for the clarification, because the audience and I did assume that you were saying we should funnel the funds to student debt relief, and that is not a Republican stance.
All right, so I would like us to consider something else, and that has to do with the advanced age of both men. Trump is 78, Biden is 81. Both are making history as the two oldest major party candidates in the U.S. Elections to seek the presidency. I mean, if Biden wins, he will be 86 in the next 4 years after the elections. Dr. Hero, I wonder perhaps if this is a concern for you.
Oh, it is a significant concern. And as a matter of fact, it is my belief that President Biden should not be running at all, neither should Donald Trump. And I'll tell you why. We saw that in display last night. But for Donald Trump, the reason he should not be running is because he's a con artist. Everyone knows that. And what you saw last night was a man who is old, but has been a good president, standing there and unable to defend his record against an ex-convict. And so just listening to Ms. LeBlanc talking about how there was some peace when
I'm not sure he's an ex-convict just yet, Dr. Hero.
No.
I'm not sure he's an ex-convict just yet.
He's a convicted felon. He's a convicted felon. That's what he is. So if I said ex-convict, he's a convicted felon. We know that. And he has many other charges pending. And let me tell you, in one term, he spent more money than any American president in history. He left us in $8 trillion debt. So to say that because there were no major wars around the world when he was president, actually negates the fact that that under him, there was a higher level of poverty in the country by the time he left office than at any time in our history. So he wasn't spending the money here. He was giving the money to the rich people like him. And even going now to the next election, he has already said to billionaires, just give me money and I'll give you more tax cuts. He has said that. But as far as the age, Mr. Biden, even at 80 years old or 81 years old, he has still done a very good job as president. But what we have after last night is that right now we have a 5-alarm fire in the country, especially in the Democratic Party, with people saying right now we think he needs to stand aside. I am actually one of...
Doctor, we're absolutely pressed for time, but I need to get in one or two more issues before we round off our conversation. One of such issues has to do with abortion laws in the U.S. There's also the question around immigration. In 20 seconds or less, what's your summary about these very pivotal issues?
I happen to think that the fact that we make abortion a political issue in this country speaks very much to the moral decadence of not only our politics, but also speaks to the fact that we like to judge women. Nobody says, let us take Viagra away from men, because it is men who are making these decisions. That is one. And as far as immigration is concerned, consider the fact that we like to believe that America is a nation of immigrants. But what tends to happen when we come to political season like this is that we forget that even the people who are running for office and attacking immigrants are themselves children of immigrants. Do you know that Mr. Trump's father was an immigrant and his mother was an immigrant? So without immigrants, there would be no United States of America as we currently have it. It becomes a political issue like this.
Yes, so
just to divide people, right?
Yes, so Joanna, you want to add something as regards issues around abortion laws as well?
Absolutely. I think that we need to stop trying to legislate the bodies of women and let women decide what is best for them and their health. That's one. Secondly, on the issue of immigration, the reason why we have a border crisis in this country is partly because of U.S. failed foreign policy around the nation. When you look around the world, when you look at U.S. policy towards the Republic of Haiti, when you look at U.S. policy towards places like the Congo, because when you look at the border, it's not just Mexicans at the border. You have folks from the African continent, from Congo, from DRC, from Cameroon, folks from the Western Hemisphere, places like Haiti, Jamaica, you name it. If the U.S. have a more sound foreign policy towards those various countries around the world, you will see less migration, irregular migration into the United States. So the issue around the border crisis is one that is incredibly nuanced. We have to look at a foreign policy and role that they have played in destabilizing some of these countries to the point where people have to leave their countries to come to the U.S. border.
Yes, I mean, just before I let you all go, Somto, we are broadcasting live from Lagos, Nigeria, and of course we are here in the continent. I wonder perhaps what you think is the lessons for the continent.
The lessons for the continent for right now is do not politicize very emotional issues. Focus on the pocketbook issues. Focus on the economy. Focus on national security. Focus on energy security. Those are some of the top 3 lessons I would suggest for right now, and then we can talk about the rest later. But those are the top 3 ones: national security, energy security, and food security. Those are the lessons.
Dr. Hero, as well, 15 seconds. I mean, lessons for the continent as well. When you look at this presidential debate as well, what's the lesson for Nigeria and the continent?
Number one, Africans need to learn to hold their leaders accountable. And number 2, policies are important, but it's not just enough to write them, but it's also more important to implement them. And number 3, people should not be running for office unless they have clear plans of what they are going to do for the continent, but also they need to be able to show that it's something that they have done, even at small levels. Those are the top 3 that I will give right now.
All right. So, I mean, it's a fine place to anchor our conversation. We must thank you most kindly indeed for agreeing to speak with us here on Channels TV. Dr. Hero Oniosele is the founding director of social work program at the University of Delaware, and he joined us from New York. Also on the program, Somto Aiko, a political commentator live for us in Houston, Texas. And of course, Joanna LeBlanc, a national security law and foreign policy commentator, has joined us from Washington, D.C. Ladies and gentlemen, we must thank you most kindly for your analysis and, of course, for agreeing to speak with us here on Channels TV.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Stay with election matters, but Iranians have been voting for a new president following the death of Ibrahim Raisi in a helicopter crash, chosen from a tightly controlled group of 4 candidates loyal to the supreme leader at a time of growing public frustration. Polls opened at 8 a.m. today, and are scheduled to close at 6 p.m. But the voting time can be extended until midnight, we understand. The snap presidential elections coincides with escalating regional tensions due to the current war between Israel and Iranian ally Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon. Iran's first direct attack against Israel in April, as well as increased Western pressure on Iran over its nuclear program. Now, while the election is unlikely to bring a major shift in the Islamic Republic's policies, its outcome could influence the succession to Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran's 85-year-old supreme leader, who has been in power since 1989. A council made up of 6 scholars and 6 juries aligned with Khamenei, the supreme leader, vets candidates. It approved only 6 from an initial pool of 80 candidates. 2 contenders subsequently dropped out just about 24 hours to the voting. Let's shift attention now to the war in Gaza. EU leaders have nominated current European Commission head Ursula von der Leyen for a second 5-year term in the bloc-stop job at a summit in Brussels. Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas was picked as the EU's next foreign affairs chief, and former Portuguese Prime Minister Antonio Costa was chosen as the next chairman of EU summits. All 3 candidates are from centrist pro-EU factions. The European Parliament is due to vote on the nominations for Ms. von der Leyen and Ms. Kallas. Analysts are suggesting the leadership package represents continuity for the EU at a time of geopolitical uncertainty. It comes despite a surge in support for hard-right parties in European Parliament elections earlier this month. And heavy rains have caused a roof at Delhi airport to collapse, killing 1 person and injuring 8 others. The huge pillars supporting the roof smashed into cars parked along the airport's Terminal 1. Authorities at the airport say all flights from the terminal have been suspended until further notice, adding that 4 vehicles were damaged and 8 people received minor injuries in the incident. India's aviation regulator has advised airlines to accommodate passengers on alternate flights or offer them refunds. The accident has impacted the travel plans of thousands of most domestic flights take off from Terminal 1. Well, back here in the continent, a Kenyan High Court has approved the use of military force to restore order following days of anti-tax protests that at some point overwhelmed the police in Nairobi. Clashes between protesters and police officers erupted again around Nairobi's presidential palace Thursday as demonstrators demanded President William Ruto's resignation. This in spite of the president's pledge to withdraw a finance bill and proposed tax increases. Armored military vehicles patrolled streets in the capital Nairobi on Thursday as police fired tear gas to disperse protesters and demonstrators who had threatened to storm the presidential palace. Dozens were injured after the clashes, and medical teams provided first aid on the street.
I think we received about between 25 and 30 cases today. Mostly just superficial injuries, tear gas, inhalation. One was a serious case of a gunshot wound. Yeah.
All right, Special Representative for the Central African Republic, Valentine Wakbiza, believes it is time to reposition livestock farming and cattle migration as factors of peaceful coexistence, stabilization and economic development. Addressing the Security Council, he said, quote, the recent killings of 16 civilians in Lime village following a land conflict involving local farmers and cattle owners is a stark reminder of the urgency to reverse the dynamics of violence, end quote. He also adds that the mission is making progress on the security, humanitarian and peace-building fronts in Hot Mbomo.
Past and recurrent political and security crises in the Central African Republic have negatively impacted transhumance, turning a secular practice into one of the main triggers of attacks against the civilians. The recent killings of 16 civilians in Lime village in the Uampende prefecture, following a land conflict involving local farmers and cattle owners, was a stark reminder of the urgency to reverse the dynamics of violence and to reposition livestock farming and transhumance as factors of peaceful coexistence, stabilization, and economic development. Within a very short time, working closely with national and local authorities, local communities, and humanitarian partners, the mission is making tangible and transformative progress on the security, humanitarian, and peace-building fronts in Mbomo. I'm deeply concerned by the continuous misinformation and disinformation campaigns against the mission, with an uptick in the hostile content targeting MINUSCA. This further complicates the already challenging context in which the mission operates. I call on the government to hold accountable identified individuals, including public servants, channeling and echoing such campaigns, which pose a significant risk to the safety and security of our peacekeepers, while constraining the mission ability to optimally implement tasks mandated by the Council and requested by Central African national authorities.
Well, back to the war in Gaza. Hundreds of protesters have held a rally outside Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's residence in Jerusalem, calling on the Israeli leader to resign and end the war in Gaza. The crowd made a huge fire on the road, waving flags and holding pictures of those still held in captive by Hamas as authorities try to extinguish the blaze. Mr. Netanyahu has claimed his administration is doing all it can to free the hostages and defeat Hamas in Gaza. Last week, he called on his coalition governments to get a grip following weeks of infighting and has also accused the U.S. of withholding weapons, which Washington has denied.
Sick and tired of you, and your day has come. The people will overthrow you. Motherfuckers, you ruined everything. You're a disgrace. You're a bunch of racists and fascists and cowards. You're a bunch of nothings, of zero nothing. All you touch gets ruined and destroyed. You're a disgrace to human nature.
And finally, on the program, everyone, Uganda Museum's head curator, Nelson Abiti, is insisting that more than 30 artifacts which the UK's Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology at Cambridge loaned to Uganda are not going to go back. He's calling on the UK institutions to deregister the artifacts which have been in the UK for over 100 years. The items include a rare drum and a headdress. They're set to go on display in 2025 and 2026 following acclimatization. The agreement between Uganda and Cambridge is renewable and allows the possibility of a permanent loan or local ownership.
These are rare objects that were made by our ancestors. Many of us have not seen. In fact, we expect millions of Ugandans to come and see, trace. If there's an object that was associated at the time of Omukama Kabalega, was exiled in Sicily Island, don't you think many people, he's our hero. He defended, he resisted colonialism. People should come. These objects, specifically these ones, tell us the period when some of our heroes resisted colonialism and during the time of resistance, and then forceful, they were taken away from the people. And we expect many people to come and see this object. They are unique, the designs are unique, and they are historical to us. It is not a bank loan where you have to pay it back. It's a way of, for you, that I give a responsibility to you to go and take care of these objects to make it accessible to people. It's very difficult for people to go and see these things through this object. When they took them, it had become their objects in that museum. They had registered them. Now, for them to deregister it, they first do what we call loaning. They give me a responsibility that if I've given you these objects, you are real sure accepting them and you are making it accessible to the communities. Our people, our children are able to see it rather than they can't afford to go to Europe. Then later on we will say now, these objects have stabilized, they are good, we have kept them in good condition. Please, just deregister them that side. They are not going back. In fact, they are not going to go back.
Absolutely, they are not going to go back. We're looking forward to the display in 2025 and 2026, talking about the treasures in Uganda. Of course, we hope for more return of these treasures to the continent. And that does it for us here on the show for today and indeed this week. On behalf of the production team and everyone here, I'm Kelly Egiga in Lagos. Bye now.